Over at Pioneer Park, Marietta taking on Zanesville. Solomon Norris, he's going to go right back up the middle for a lead-off single, finding his way aboard. Now with one on, the pitcher, Makai Murray, continues the offense for Zanesville as that ball gets through and they have two runners on. Now with two outs, Jensen Perry hits one that gets over the head of Saban Jonas over there at second base, and Zanesville would go up 1-0. Starting in the bottom of the first now, two quick outs, but Logan Fling would ground the ball past third base, but that's all the offense Marietta would be able to generate. Now with one runner on, Quentin Warden grounds the ball the opposite way, and he's going to put 2-1 for Zanesville. But on the mound, Tate Jonas gets the strikeout looking on the outside half of the plate to leave the runner stranded. After back-to-back strikeouts here, Saban Jonas keeps the inning alive with a single into right field. Marietta trying to jumpstart that offense now. They're going to put on the hit and run, a swing and a miss, but Jonas will slide into second safely. But on the mound, Murray gets all three of the outs in the second via the punch out, and Marietta would hold on and get the win 5-4.